Let's talk a little bit about Florida. We have, I mean, I guess I would sort of call this good news out of Florida in the sense that in politics, you often get reverse consequences. So, like, think back to the 2016 Republican primary, which really started in 2015. Donald Trump arrived with no experience, no reasonable ideas, no credible path to getting anything done. And he was rewarded by becoming the Republican nominee and ultimately president of the United States. And similarly, we have seen in the state of Florida, radical COVID governor Ron DeSantis experience the COVID hellscape that Florida has become and not really suffer when it comes to polling and when it comes to approval. That seems now to have changed, and that is very good news. Ron DeSantis's poll numbers have started to plummet as the COVID numbers in Florida continue to get worse and worse and worse. And what impact this will have on his gubernatorial reelection campaign and possibly his eventual candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination, we just don't know. But let's look at this report from Truthout. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is seeing approval ratings plunge after enacting and seeking to enforce stringent measures to prevent schools in Florida from taking actions to prevent the spread of coronavirus. Earlier this year, DeSantis signed a bill into law that banned local governments, including school districts, from issuing rules about masking, despite a CDC recommendation that every school require masking to prevent students and staff from contracting and spreading COVID-19. After several school districts said they would keep their masking rules in place, DeSantis threatened to withhold the pay of district officials in punishment for their defiance, even though they were acting in the interest of public health. DeSantis went forward with the threats despite polling in his state showing that most people support policies made at the local level to keep masking in place. In fact, most Americans back masking requirements in schools, and Florida is no different. Around 62% of Florida voters support rules requiring masks for students and staff. Now, new polling shows DeSantis may have harmed himself politically over his stubborn stance on masking. A Political Matrix listener group survey asked Florida residents whether they have a positive or negative view of the governor on his handling of the pandemic. Only 43% say favorable, 53, almost 54% say unfavorable. Importantly, this puts DeSantis at a disadvantage against his potential political opponents. He's up for re-election in 22. In a hypothetical matchup against U.S. Congressman Charlie Crist, DeSantis would lose the governorship, 43 to 57. And DeSantis is also faring poorly against the Florida Agriculture Commissioner, Nikki Fried. Fried would win about 54 to 46. We have this new polling data. It is very interesting to look at. This is the poll that's referred to. And we'll go through some of the numbers. First, when rating the handling of the pandemic, DeSantis has 54% either unfavorable or very unfavorable. When you break it out by party lines, Republicans are still strongly supportive. 66.2% have a combined favorable and very favorable. The poll goes on to find, next we see a complete flip from 8 weeks ago, with today Charlie Crist leading DeSantis 57 to 43. What seems to be the biggest part is the amount of grasp each has within their party. With Democrats, Crist has almost 90% of his base. With Republicans, DeSantis is down to only 75% of Republican responders. So that's an important signal, and that's similar, actually, to what we saw with Donald Trump, where you saw Joe Biden going into the 2020 election carrying almost every Democrat, whereas Donald Trump was still carrying a majority, but a smaller majority of Republicans. And of course, we know how that ultimately turned out. So, this really shouldn't be news. Like, this is what we call logical. When people's opinion reflects and responds to what takes place in the real world, that's logical and that makes sense. We've become so used to seeing Republicans reward the worst people and the worst political performance that in a way we're sort of like surprised. Wow, DeSantis has ruined Florida over COVID and his approval rating is plummeting. It makes sense, but it still surprises us. Now, someone wrote to me and said, you know what's going on, David? Ron DeSantis' supporters are dying of COVID, so he's losing approval. The math doesn't check out on that for now, but it could. Over time, you could actually start to see the fact that it's disproportionately Republicans who are dying of the virus because it's disproportionately the unvaccinated who are dying of the virus, it could start to make a difference. And what I mean by that is, as of about 10 days ago, 1,500 vaccinated people have died of COVID nationally. And meanwhile, 1,000 people a day are dying. So total 1,500 vaccinated, but every day 1,000 are dying, overwhelmingly the unvaccinated. Over time, you could see a state like Florida, where Ron DeSantis only won by 33,000, but it now has 42,000 COVID deaths. It's conceivable you could get to a point where the death partisan gap could cost Ron DeSantis re-election. A lot more people would have to die because remember, not everybody votes. So of the 42,000 that died, probably about half are actual voters, maybe even less. And then within that, you have to look at the partisan split. It might only be a $7,000 death gap between parties. So very rough estimate, unless you see 120,000, 140,000 dead in Florida with a big partisan gap, I don't know that it would actually lead to DeSantis losing because his voters died. But the fact that we're even talking about how far are we from that math making sense tells you how insane the situation has become in Florida. If you're in Florida, let me know what the mood is there. Let me know what 2022 is looking like. That's a big, if Democrats were able to hold California in the recall and take Florida in 2022, it would be a really big deal heading into 2024. Let me know your thoughts. You can find me on Twitter at dpacman. Science has shown us that lowering your body temperature at night helps you sleep. I can't sleep in a hot room. That's why I love our sponsor, Chili Sleep, which makes customizable climate-controlled sleep solutions to sleep better. Their flagship products are the Uller sleep system and the Cube sleep system, which is what I have. Both are hydro-powered, temperature-controlled luxury mattress pads. You can make them as cold as 55 degrees Fahrenheit. If you wanted, you could go as hot as 115 degrees. I like the cooler option. I keep mine at 60 degrees, and it gives me a great cool night of sleep. No feeling hot, no more sweating. I'm falling asleep faster, and it pairs perfectly with Chili Sleep's weighted Chili Blanket, which keeps you cold on top, too. They'll give you 20% off everything when you go to chilisleep.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.